Hello and welcome to Pluribus Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. This is, of course, episode 2 of a series, a mini-series, It's not even that, really. Just basically a short little thing where at certain points I'll be looking over foreign elections, because a lot of foreign elections are coming up this year. Now, this episode in particular you might actually be very curious about, because, who cares? Well, you'll see why I picked this one for many reasons at the end of this. Well, not at the end, when it comes up. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to talk about something interesting about Nancy Pelosi. Turns out her husband had won nearly $5 million on a trade of stocks in Google's parent company Alphabet. And he's also making bets on Amazon and Apple ahead of the House Judiciary Committee's vote last month to advance 5 antitrust bills targeting major tech giants. Which is very interesting, all things considered. I mean, this is obvious that Pelosi would do this, but it's fair to show that this is not necessarily the most welcoming sign in regards to Pelosi's viewpoint on breaking up tech giants. Speaking of big tech, Joe Biden has apparently even decided to weigh in on it, signing an executive order on Friday to, quote, promote fair and competition in the United States economy. However, one thing that's interesting is that it actually specifically targets certain elements of big tech, targeting the so-called killer acquisitions. For those that don't know what a killer acquisition is, it's basically when a company buys one of their competitors to basically take over a part of the market. Like, why make your own video streaming service when you could buy Twitch? Much like what happened with Facebook when it bought Instagram and WhatsApp. Now, this is good. However, it's being framed in a way that is definitely not in, it's the way it's being framed is definitely not in a explicitly positive light. Well, I mean, it's positive depending on your viewpoint, but basically, one of the big things is, the idea is that this is supposed to increase competition and basically try to save capitalism. It even said point blank, capitalism without competition isn't capitalism, it's exploitation. No, that's capitalism, bro. Look at me. This is the big problem with all these, people who are, super diehard capitalists. This is what you want. These Facebook mergers, where they basically own everything, they don't want to admit it, but that's what they want. That is the end goal. The end goal is that Walt Disney and his company is going to own everything. That is the thing you want. The idea is the companies that are good at what they're doing, they're the ones that are going to stick around and then buy the rest of the competition. The myth of capitalism increases, does good is stupid. That's what happened, when capitalism was first invented. It was literally we're going to do this thing. But then by the time the second generation happened, you can't do that anymore because somebody has an advantage. They own their daddy's money. Yeah, sure, capitalism was good for the idea of when we were playing with sticks in the mud. But it didn't work. The next generation happens, you have a new generation that has the advantage of the previous one. And the idea is that you're supposed to do anything you can to stay afloat, even if it is ethically wrong. That's why everybody makes those jokes about businessmen don't have souls, because they don't. They can't. If they had souls, they wouldn't do what they do. So yeah, capitalism stinks. Anyways, let's move on to the next story. The Ohio District 11 special election. That race sure is at it again. Because the Congressional Black Caucus has officially announced that they are endorsing someone in this race. They are endorsing Shontel Brown for this race. It's definitely a thing. Honestly, at this point, I'm going to say, I still think Nina's going to win. But that doesn't mean stop. That doesn't mean stop donating. That doesn't mean stop supporting. But, look, they're pulling out every punch they have. If they're going to go down, they're going to go down fighting. There are really only two things that could have happened. They either could have silently stood back and just watched Shontel Brown drown in the river that is her campaign, Or they could have simply tried to, like, do everything they could. But it looks like this time they're trying to go down fighting. But Nina's gonna win, and she's gonna do a pretty darn good job, if I'll say so myself. Which is why all those people on Twitter are now all of a sudden going, Nina Turner's husband's a cop. We can't trust her about defund the police. It's like, shut up. This wasn't a problem with you before. Now you're bringing it up now, when Nina's gonna win, and you're gonna claim, oh, we're lefties. No, you're not. I'm probably gonna make a video. I'm probably gonna make a podcast specifically about this topic because I am legitimately sick and tired of this. Like, you may have heard me say it before. I've said it in the last episode, and I'll say it again. There are some lefties on the internet that have accepted the fact that they are going to lose, that they're never going to win, so when other lefties are actually trying to win, they're going to try and actively undermine them because they know that if they win, that means lefties like them have to go and actually do something. That's why you'll see all the hammer and sickle people be like, actually, Nina Turner is actually a sellout and AOC is a fraud, because communists have already accepted that they're going to lose, so there's no point in actually trying to accomplish anything because they know they're going to lose. They have accepted the fact, they have looked in the mirror and said, you are going to lose today, and that is okay. Because that means we can still just go online and shitpost on Twitter. And anarchist, that doesn't mean you don't get it part of this too. You do the same thing too, except sometimes you don't. You've accepted the fact that you're going to lose, so in turn, you don't actually try to help the people who will win. And if you don't believe me, historical precedent, the Socialist Equality Party, the Socialist Labor Party, they have actively pushed against larger left-wing groups, like the Socialist Party, like when this even like the Socialist Party isn't even like purely good in this either. The Socialist Party sometimes, when there was a bigger lefty that was on the scene, they would try to attack him too. During the 1948 election, they were pushing hard against Henry Wallace. But when you accept you're going to lose, you'll just do everything you can to try and make the other person lose. That way you can point your finger at them and say, actually, if we were the ones in that position, we wouldn't be able to do it. But then, just what happens is that they never ever find themselves in that position because people don't actually care about their ideology. Because, believe it or not, guys, like, I'll say this to the communists a million times over. I'll say it before, I'll say it again, I'm going to continue to say it. Nobody cares about the worldwide socialist revolution. Not a single person, aside from you and your fanboys, are going to care about that. People want their immediate needs met. They don't want to push for a magical hypothetical scenario where they'll get those needs and more. All they have to do is potentially risk their lives for a worldwide socialist revolution. No. And again, don't believe me? Historical precedent. I base everything that I espouse based on historical precedent. You really think that the worldwide socialist revolution is going to happen now? The Great Depression. We had the Great Depression. And they still didn't push for the worldwide socialist revolution. Groups tried to, but it didn't happen. Because they knew that it was better to try and transition into a workable, immediate solution to their problem. That is why when the Socialist Labor Party was trying to push for the worldwide socialist revolution exclusively, they were not really going to do so well. But then when the Communist Party created some unions to help them in the immediate time, but also push for the idea of the worldwide socialist revolution, they did slightly better. And that is why groups such as the Huey Long fans, the Socialist Party, and FDR excelled at those time periods because they actually met the people where they stood. They were like, this is what we're going to do for you now. Norman still had his ideological fantasies, but he met them where they stood. And that is why they loved, and that's why Norman Thomas was one of the most loved people in the world. Not in the world, in America. He was America's socialist grandpa for a long period of time. Even during the Red Scare, they were just like, come on, man. That's our Uncle Norman. So yeah, a rant against the ultra-left aside, let's talk about some foreign affairs. Not the one for the main topic, but this is going to transition to it. Well, not this specific story. We're going to transition all the way to it. First, let's start off in a foreign land called Sweden. For those who don't know, Sweden recently had a huge problem with their, parliament. The current Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven of the Social Democrats, was forced out of the prime ministership and then was quickly sworn back in recently. What happened? Well, let's explain what happened. Stefan Löfven was trying to push for some, rent issues. However, he was not going to be fair. His plan was that he wanted to remove rent controls on new apartment buildings that were going to be built. And one of the members of his coalition, the Left Party, which, for those who don't know, is a socialist alternative to the Social Democratic Party, basically the Social Democratic Party's left wing, so the explicitly democratic socialist types, they basically said point blank, okay, fine, you all gonna do this? Fine, we withdraw our support for you. And when and in parliamentary systems, when they withdraw their support for a prime minister, that means he has to resign and then open negotiations for a new prime minister, or he has to hold a snap election. And the way Sweden's parliament worked was that there's a center-left coalition, which is the Social Democrats, the Greens, and formerly the Left Party. And then there was the right-wing coalition, but the right-wing coalition was a center-right coalition. Meanwhile, there was a far-right party called the Sweden Democrats, which have been trying steadily to pick up momentum. And basically the idea was now he had to renegotiate the parliament so that he was able to get a couple of the center ish parties, which are in between the center-right and center-left coalitions. Basically, he had to get a bunch of them to agree to... he didn't even have to get them to vote for him. He basically had to get them to abstain from the election in order to, prevent, a right-wing parliament from being enacted. And the Left Party always intended, we're going to withdraw our support, and then when negotiations happen again, we're going to not vote for your opponent. We're going to just abstain, but this is a warning. They basically did that as a warning, hey... you need us, and if you don't have us, well, you're gonna lose. And that's how he basically, got in with another minority government. And that's how parliamentary systems work, which is why a lot of people love parliamentary systems more than the United States system, where we can't do this. We can't do this. We can't, do this to the speaker. There are some people who think we can, but we can't. That's not how it works in the United States. We're not a parliamentary system. We're a federal republic. We're not a parliament. And yes, this is a slight jab at forced vote people who don't know what they're talking about. But anyways, let's move on to the next story. Haiti. Remember Haiti? No one does. Well, we remember that earthquake that happened a little bit ago. That's all I remember of them. But basically, here's what happened. The president was assassinated. Crazy time in Haiti, am I right? But here's the thing. I've been seeing a lot of people talking about oh, it's tragic that the president of Haiti was assassinated. Godspeed to Haiti. We love you, Haiti. We stand with you, and blah blah blah. And it's guys, you are aware that Haiti hated him, right? I looked into him, and it's while he was being the day he was assassinated was the 2-year anniversary of when protests against his place happened. They hated him and were begging him to resign. And the way this is going to work is that it's going to be they actually are calling for a new election to basically elect a new president, while prime ministers and another guy tried to fight for power, because they don't really know what's going on at this point. It just so happened, it happened at a snap. People were confused. They don't know what's going on. So yeah, Haiti, I hope things go well for Haiti. And let's say hypothetically this scenario was a bright light. Let's say hypothetically, they elect a new president, and this president is far better than the person that they killed. And that's my major guess. My guess about this is that Haiti's president was killed by political dissidents. I mean, it could be even some of the people who are going to be leaders now were killed them because it's like dead weight. But let's move on to another thing about a very tumultuous nation, Nicaragua. Remember Nicaragua? I sure do. Yeah, well, Daniel Ortega's at it again. Our boy Daniel, Daniel, back at it again with jailing political opposition. They should make that meme. Lester Aleman, a student leader, was arrested, and like a candidate of an opposition candidate by the name of Medardo Marena was arrested as well. For those who remember, Medardo Marena is one of the two people that I considered like at the very least good opposition. Like, I mean, him and George Enriquez were basically like the only two people that I legitimately were like, these two seem like honest actors who are opposing Ortega from actual legitimate things. Like, the other ones were like business leaders and like these guys were like people who were like business leaders who had like a lot of incentive to like oppose Ortega. Like, I don't know, I'm trying to figure the right words. Like, basically they'd be like if the head of CNN was like an opposition. I mean, yeah, like think of Joe Scarborough. They're basically like Joe Scarborough, who was like, I oppose Donald Trump because blah blah blah. Like, they're basically like that. Meanwhile, Marena and George Enriquez, they seem to be coming from like actual good opposition, like AOC or Bernie Sanders or something like that. So yeah, it looks like it's going to be a Daniel Ortega versus George Enriquez, and let's figure out if it's going to stay that way. Anyways, now that we're on Latin America, time to go on to the main topic of this video, Honduras. Honduras is one of the many countries that is going to be holding an election in this year. Now you might say, why am I talking about the Honduras general election? Now, that's a very good question. And to a degree, I don't necessarily have the best answer. Because, well, I mean, why am I talking about it now? I'll tell you why I'm talking about it now. Because I legitimately think that nothing really about this situation is going to change. Much like how I talked about the Ortega situation, I predicted in that episode Ortega was going to win, and that it was more likely he was going to jail some prominent opposition candidates. That's exactly what happened. This election cycle, it doesn't seem that there's going to be much change in it either. I'm holding off on the other two because there's a lot of tumultuous stuff going on in those elections. I mean, one of them hasn't even chosen their candidates yet, so we'll have to wait and see how things play out before we actually see, like, how things play out. But this one seems like it's going to be pretty similar, but I would say that it seems that, there's a reason why I chose Honduras. Okay, so I'm going to have to set up a little bit of Honduras history, and I'm going to have to introduce you to a very interesting figure. Meet Manuel Zelaya. Manuel Zelaya is a Honduran politician who was president of Honduras, elected in 2006. He was elected under a very a liberal, like his party was called the Liberal Party, and that was what he was elected on. The Liberal Party is sort of like center right, center left a little bit. But basically, he governed as a very staunch leftist. And that was a very huge, confusion. It all started when he joined the Bolivarian Alliance of the Americas and frequently made alliances with, Raul Castro and Hugo Chavez. And that was a very huge, whoa. They didn't think that that was going to be a, he made a massive shift to the left. And that confused many people in the Honduras political establishment. Yo, you were elected as you were elected pretty much as a center-right guy, and yet now you're governing as a leftist. So, what the heck is going on here? And things were going very well. Honduras did pretty good during this time period. However, one major thing happened that made many in the Honduras, it made many people confused. He wanted to do something called the fourth ballot box referendum, The way Honduras worked at the time, at least, was that there are 3 separate ballot boxes. Ballot box 1 was where you would elect the president. Ballot box 2 is where you would elect a congressional candidate that would serve you in their legislative branch. And then the last one would serve for your municipal candidates, like your mayors and your city councils, etc. Well, Zelaya wanted to do something interesting. He wanted to introduce a 4th ballot box. And the idea was that this 4th ballot box would basically be if he would hold a referendum where people in Honduras would vote on whether or not they would be able to amend the Constitution via a national assembly. Now, here's the thing. Many people in the media, like Honduras media, were a bit perplexed at this. And, of course, Western media as well. Congress had the power to change the Constitution already. However, they can only change and amend 368 of the 375 articles. One of the articles that they couldn't amend was Article 374. 374 basically stated this: presidents get 1 term, done. And that's what many people were confused about. They were thinking, or at least they were saying, that Zelaya was trying to change the Constitution so that he could run for another term. Which they're like, they sounded the alarms. Like, oh no, this is bad. Zelaya kept insisting that he had every intention to step down as soon as his term ended, which was going to be in that hypothetical election, where they would be able to change the Constitution. And the problem was, he wanted to continue on with it. He was very insistent on the idea, and every other branch of government kept saying, no, you cannot do this, Zelaya. The Supreme Court ruled point blank, you cannot do this. Stop it. And Zelaya said, screw you, I'm doing it anyways. And on June 26, 2009, the Supreme Court of Honduras issued a secret warrant for Zelaya's arrest, and 2 days later, the military stormed into his house in the middle of the night, detained him, and instead of putting him on trial, they sent him on an airplane to go wherever. And that's where things got a whole lot tricky, because, this was very obviously a coup. Very obviously a coup, because he wasn't put on trial. Very clearly, he was not put on trial. Even if he was put on trial, they might be like, oh, it's a stacked trial. But, he was not even put on trial for what he did. They just sent him on a plane, be gone. And they even read a note that everybody's been like, but this is clearly not, this is clearly not my note. And here's the thing. This specific situation was so blatant and so off that basically all of the usual groups that you'd think would support this actually vocally oppose this. Obama, who was president at the time, said, this is screwed up, we can't, this is stupid, this is obviously a coup, and we need to work within our power to try and get Zelaya back in office, because he's the rightfully elected president, so he should be back in office. The OAS and the UN, they basically verbally oppose this. Everybody opposed this, but the thing is, they opposed it in rhetoric, but in actions, things were a bit different. You see, remember how I said Obama opposed it? Yeah, well, Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at the time, he ordered her, hey, can you, do this thing and, officially designate this as a coup and that we will not support Honduras? Hillary Clinton said, no, we're going to continue supporting Honduras and stuff. So, things became a bit complicated, because after that election, the notion of the Liberal Party was essentially tarnished, and a right-wing party by the name of the National Party basically quickly took over and easily won the election. And then, interestingly enough, they, in the 2013 election, Juan Orlando Hernandez won, And then in 2017, Orlando Hernandez won again. So even the thing that they were all bitching and moaning about, like, oh, he's going to try and run for re-election, he literally did. So it's like very clearly double standard here, but it doesn't matter because it was the bad guy who was doing it. And I mean, Zelaya, he still even has some role in Honduras politics, and we'll get to that when we get to that. Because he actually, like, he stuck around. The liberals and him have had a severed relationship ever since, but he stuck around, and we'll get to that. Now let's talk about the election itself. You see, while there are 8 parties in the parliament, essentially very few of them actually try to participate in a lot of other forms of electoralism. Like, for example, the Innovation Unity Party, the Honduran Patriotic Alliance, Christian Democratic Party of Honduras, Anti-Corruption Party, Democratic Unification Party. Essentially, a lot of the smaller parties, all those parties have, like, single-digit members of parliament. 4-4-1-1-1-1. Like, essentially, these parties, they can't really do anything major, so they have to essentially support one of the candidates of a major, like a bigger party. And essentially, Honduras politics revolves around 3 parties and 1 person. Now, you might say, huh? That's weird. You'll see when I explain it. First, we're going to start out with the party that I think has the least amount of chance of actually winning. Liberals. The Liberal Party, like I said, basically has been pushed to the wayside. The one figure that is actually very notable within the party, that is actually, like, took a very big stance on things, Zelaya, is gone. Like, he doesn't support that party anymore because the party and him don't see eye to eye. So there really isn't much for them to do. Their candidate for this election cycle is Yanni Rosenthal. Now, for those who don't know about Yanni Rosenthal, I would assume not a lot of you know about him. He was a guy who essentially runs one faction of the party, and he is not that popular even within his own party, because in 2015, Yanni was actually arrested for, quote, providing money laundering and other services that support the international narcotics trafficking activities of multiple Central American drug traffickers and their criminal organizations. And he pled guilty to those charges. He was released from prison just soon enough to announce his run for president, and even his party has essentially turned on him. Like, they don't have any intention of supporting him. The one, like, who's the person that he ran against? Marcio Videla, who's like, I believe he's basically running like an opposition to him in his own party. He's not running for president, but he's essentially trying to oppose him in a sort of on and off way. Now, the one figure that I talked about, like, that revolves around 3 parties and 1 person, the person in question is a man by the name of Salvador Nasrallah. Now, he is, like, very interesting, as, like, he was the one who actually created the Anti-Corruption Party, but it didn't really pan out. He ran for president under that party in 2013, but it didn't pan out. And, you know, it's essentially like pushed to the side. So he's basically like, okay, like, for the next election cycle, 2017, he ran as a unity opposition candidate, where a bunch of the opposition parties got together and were like, we hate the National Party and we hate the idea that he's running for re-election, so let's all unite behind you. For this election cycle, he's trying to, like, change his stance again. Basically, his idea is that he is a populist opposition candidate, and that's essentially all his political viewpoint. He is a populist opposition candidate, and that's why he was the candidate in the 2017. Like, he represented a coalition that was left-wing, and yet the parties that he keeps proposing and aligning with are the ones who are center-right. But that didn't matter to them at the time because they needed a prime opposition candidate. So, that's what they needed. So, they, of course, ran with it. He was the opposition candidate, so they supported him. Okay, the next candidate is Nasri Afruda of the National Party. He's the one who's basically seen as the frontrunner. Like he's the current mayor of Tegucigalpa. I think that's how you pronounce it. And that's essentially it. He's basically basically he's just the guy who was chosen to be the nominee. Nothing more. A similar thing, but for a good reason, is the other opposition candidate, that candidate being Xiomara Castro, also known by her full name, Iris Xiomara Castro de Zelaya. For those who obviously don't know what I'm talking about, she is the wife of Manuel Zelaya, and her and him co-founded a new political party in the wake of the next election at the time, which was the 2012 elections, called Liberty and Refoundation, also known by its abbreviation, LIBRE. It is a democratic socialism of the 21st century. Basically, it's just a socialist party. And they are basically trying to position themselves as the main opposition to the National Party, which they've done very successfully because they are the party with the largest members of opposition. And basically, since their founding, they've basically tried to solidify themselves as what the Liberal Party sort of became under Zelaya. And that has actually led to a very decent number of vote totals. They always got into a very decent second, and the last election cycle, 2017, was the interesting one because that was the one where they nominated Nasrallah as their candidate, and even though they don't agree 100%, the idea was that they're going to get a popular opposition candidate to oppose the National Party, and that was how things were going to play out. However, this election cycle, things are going to be a bit different because obviously, I mean, let's be real. It doesn't. I picked this episode to be this one for a reason because I didn't expect for there to be that much of change, and the current polling shows that Castro's at a second, not a first. So, as much as I'd like to see her win, maybe, I don't know. So yeah, this is actually a relatively shorter episode, so, I mean, there's not much else to say on Honduras elections. I'm not seeing a lot of people talk about it, so maybe this episode will spark people actually caring about the Honduras elections. Well, who knows? Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video when it comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.